Hello, welcome back to reality. This is the first video I'm filming since having un bebé and una bebé. Dang it. For those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, this is Elizabeth. Joe is sleeping. Paula's rock climbing. She is 2 weeks old today. I don't know when you'll see this, but when I'm filming it, she's 2 weeks old today. That's why I don't have any makeup on. Listen, I just had a baby. My hair's kind of done though. This is in our new apartment. We moved here in April. And so you guys haven't seen it yet, but it's because I'm still putting finishing touches on, but don't you worry. I asked on my Instagram if you guys would want to see a compare and contrast between my 2 pregnancies and labor and delivery experiences. It was a unanimous vote that people wanted to see a video comparing and contrasting my experience, my 2 different experiences. Now I just want to, obviously, disclaimer, these are my personal experiences. The choices I made don't have anything to do with anybody else's choices, past or future. Okay, these are just my experiences, what we thought was best for our little family, based on our personal opinions and convictions and things like that. So this isn't a commentary on how people should do things or we did things perfectly right or whatever. None of that is what this video is about. This is me just sharing my experiences and my stories, and hopefully to encourage, but also I'm gonna be sharing some pretty real things. So if oh, there she goes, she's going, she's fading. You want to say hello? There she is. Whoa. In all her sweetness. So if medical things freak you out, or if pregnancy things freak you out, or if you're not a lady, these things might be a little bit personal for you, but they're all things that happen as a part of pregnancy and childbirth. So watch at your own risk. Maybe I should say that. The things that my pregnancies had in common are that they were both girls. Both babies were girls. They were both full term. They were both vaginal deliveries with an epidural. I also maybe should have put some mascara on. I feel like you can't see my eyeballs. I'm here, I promise. I wasn't super active in either of my pregnancies. I just am not like an exercise nut, so I just wasn't that way, especially when I was pregnant. I overall did not have miserable, like completely bedridden, miserable experiences for either pregnancy. I gained about the same amount of weight for both pregnancies, and I'm sure I'll think of other things. It was hard for me to decide how to organize this video, whether I should do it by event or by pregnancy. So I think I'll do them by pregnancy. So when I was pregnant with Joe, there's some unique things about that pregnancy experience, and there's some very unique things about this pregnancy experience that had nothing to do with each other. So kind of crazy. And this video might be all over the place because there are going to be some things that I mention next to each other, and there are some things that I'll mention in each story. So just, that's also just kind of how my brain works. So here we are. So when I got pregnant with Joe, this was in, let's see, when did we get pregnant? I don't even remember. We got pregnant with Joe, I think it was February of 2017. I'm like, what year is it? How old is she? Like having to think back. And when I got pregnant, I was really struggling with some different anxiety and depression and panic attack things. And so my overall health was not awesome. Specifically my mental and emotional health, and that then turned into like my physical well-being. But the pregnancy, I think, kind of made me take better care of myself. And so I got better like throughout the pregnancy. Like the last panic I have had was in my first trimester of pregnancy. Now, my morning sickness for that pregnancy was pretty rough. I am overall a more sensitive person anyway to like smells and textures and tastes. So my appetite's already like kind of messed up. I wish I ate more like an adult, but I don't. I wish I liked all the fancy things, but I don't. I don't like seafood. I don't. Anyway, so my senses, I think, were just like heightened during pregnancy. So throughout my whole pregnancy, I would throw up. And during the first trimester, I did, oh good, all my different appliances are turning on and shutting off. So throughout my pregnancy, I lost my train of thought. I got distracted by the light, the reflection right here. Oh well, I'm sure some of you will think that's annoying. Sorry. I think she'll be okay. So I felt nauseous my first trimester, but the rest of my trimesters, all 2 of them, I wasn't nauseous, but I was still throwing up. So it would just like, I'd be like, nah, dang it, and move on. So that was kind of odd, but just kind of how it was for me. Now, overall, my pregnancy with Joe was great. She carried really high and she was balled up really tight. And so I never at any point felt like massive. I'm sure there were days that I felt, oh, big yawn. I'm sure there were days that I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so huge, just because I'm not a very large person, usually when I'm not pregnant. And so I just wasn't used to things not fitting, and I wasn't used to like having to like turn to like get to things, and it was just kind of a hard experience in that way. But obviously I knew it was totally worth it and it would be over. And then Joe was gonna be here, and I was like so stoked for that. So at no point did I like blow up like a balloon, and I'm really grateful for that, because I think that would have made both my pregnancies pretty miserable if I like gained a lot of extra weight. And there's nothing I did that helped that happen. It's just kind of like how my body is. I'm fairly young still, I'm like mid-20s, and so a lot of people are like having kids in their 30s and even into their 40s, and so in that scale, I'm still on the younger end. So I'm sure that helped the situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's like how it's gonna go for everybody. So overall for my pregnancy, I was pretty comfortable. Obviously towards the end, there were certain things that were uncomfortable, or I was more tired, so I just definitely needed to rest in the 3rd trimester. But I wasn't what I would say like miserable, like totally miserable, get this baby out of me experience. That's not what I had. It did feel like it took a long time, but that's just because, oh, goodness. But that's just because we were excited and just like waiting and waiting and waiting for her to come. And for those of you that don't know, Joe is named after my mom. So my mom's name was Joe, and Paul's sister's name is Anna. And Joy is my middle name. And Joanna means God is gracious. And so we just thought that that was such a beautiful name. And thankfully with Peterson, a lot can go with Peterson. So we didn't have that much trouble picking Joe's name. We had more trouble picking Elizabeth. Now when it came to my actual delivery, my water tore the morning of her due date. So that's kind of fun that she came fashionably late. So we got admitted into the hospital on her due date, which was November 1st, 2017. And we went to a hospital. We didn't have a home birth or a birthing center. We went to the birth center, like in the hospital. In Colorado, there are lots of birth options, so I always feel the need to clarify. And the nurses and the doctors and the staff were just awesome. And because my water had torn, my body was already gearing up, but I didn't really feel contractions until I got the epidural. So just something about my body doesn't really feel contractions early in the labor process, even if I'm dilated and like my body's producing the right hormones and stuff. Like I just don't physically feel the contractions as much as maybe other people do. And that's just a difference in people's bodies and yeah, how we all respond differently. And then I got the epidural, and so then I really couldn't feel anything. And I remember getting significantly funnier when I got the epidural, probably just because I was relaxed. And Paul and I were just watching movies and doing crosswords and just waiting for the time to come. And definitely by the time it came, definitely by, what am I trying to say? I can't form my thought. When it came time for me to push, by then I was feeling contractions. But with an epidural, you feel the pressure, but not the pain, which is kind of a weird concept, but it's pressure and like pressure, like extreme discomfort versus like tearing, searing, fiery pain. And Joe was, usually what they'll do is have nurses come in and kind of set things up, get everything ready to go, and then have you push for a little bit before everybody's in the room, so that we're all not, I mean, because some women will push for hours, and that's like, oh my gosh, that sounds awful. With Joe, I pushed a total of 40 minutes. That's pretty quick in the pregnancy realm. Like I said, some women push for just like hours and hours, and some women will have like 72-hour labors. Like mine with Joe was not even 24 hours. Ellie's just sitting here, just like looking around. Girlfriend, you should be sleeping. You don't really care, do you? Whatever, Mom. I'm up all night anyway. So I started pushing before the doctor was in the room, and the doctor that was on call happened to be our doctor. So that was really sweet that we got to actually like have our doctor deliver Joe. And because that doesn't always happen. It's just like whoever's on call when it's time to push. And so I'm like sitting there with the nurses. The doctor wasn't in the room yet. And I start pushing, and Joe starts coming. She's like ready. And so they're like, oh my gosh, stop pushing. And I'm like, I'm not pushing. She's just coming. And so they're paging the doctor like, get here quick. So they didn't even have time to like get all their gear on and like set everything up, because she was, I could feel her crowning before the doctor was even in the room. And she came out pretty quick. And so she ended up having some fluid in her lungs. She was fine. But we ended up staying in the hospital a lot longer than average. So we were there for about 5 days. We were there for almost a week. And she was getting oxygen in the NICU and stuff like that. But because she came so quick and my body didn't have time to adjust in increments, my recovery was really, really hard. So this video, I'm not going to go into like a ton of detail, but like I was still recovering when I got pregnant with Ellie, because it was that intense and that severe. And that can look a lot of different ways for a lot of different women, but for me it was, yeah, really tough. And those first couple months were really, really rough with a new baby at home, and we weren't a very good team when it came to nursing, and so she wasn't gaining weight and I wasn't making milk, and it was like this whole thing. And yeah, thankfully we had family around who were able to help us, but it was still just really, really hard. And so when we started supplementing my milk with formula, it was like Joe was a whole new person. It was like, oh, this is who you are. You're not actually just angry all the time. You're just hungry. And now we get to actually enjoy you instead of be really sad and frustrated all the time because you won't stop crying. So that is a quick summary. It's been like 15 minutes. A quick summary of my pregnancy and labor and delivery experience with Joe. I'm trying to think if there are any other details. If there are, I'm sure I'll mention them in part 2 in the second act. So when I got pregnant with Ellie, it was around Christmas of 2018. So feels like it just happened. So that was fun to be able to announce it to our family like around Christmas time. And I was pregnant while we were on this vacation, but I didn't know yet. And so I just felt yucky. And I was like throwing up for no reason, and I didn't want to eat like all this yummy food, and it was just like really sad. And I couldn't like run around with Joe, and it was like, what is going on? Oh, I'm pregnant. And so by that point, Joe was just over 1 year old. Do you need me to hold you? Just over 1 year old. So now she's almost 2. So thankfully my morning sickness this time around was not nearly as rough, but I was sick with other things that still made me throw up. Like, like I had this cold for like a really long time, and it was really a phlegmy cold. And so like, am I gonna hold you? Do you want me to hold you? Do you need some snuggums? Do you need some snuggums? You looking? Say, oh, hey, camera. I think I'll just eat your cheeks for a midnight snack. How's that sound? Is this looking? I think she looks more like me than Joe did as a baby. So a big indication for me that I was pregnant was that my skin, my face skin, like freaked out. I don't know if you guys remember that from my Instagram, but I was like, you guys, my skin is freaking out. And actually is again now that I've had her, so I don't know what that's about. But when I was pregnant with Joe, because I was sick beforehand, my skin was already a wreck. And so I really reevaluated my skincare, and then my skin got better during pregnancy. Whereas this time around, and usually girls like, because they have their own hormones. Oh, honey. Because they have their own hormones and your hormones. Usually women's skin gets worse. But with Joe, my skin got better, but with her, my skin got worse. So my skin was fine until I got pregnant, and then it was really rough. And then I figured out a skincare situation that worked again. But now it seems as if I need to reevaluate, or maybe my body's just still recovering from all the hormones. So I thought that maybe Ellie was going to be a boy because my pregnancy was already really different. So I wasn't as sick, but my skin was different, and stuff like that. So I thought, I was like, oh, it's different enough, like it must be a boy. And we were starting to think about boy names, and because we used all of our like top girl name combinations with Joe, we were like, what are we gonna name this kid? And so and Paul and I could not agree on a boy name, and so it's probably good that we had another girl. So overall, this pregnancy was actually a lot harder than my pregnancy with Joe, and I think it's because my body was kind of stretched out, and I wasn't carrying as high and as tight, and so it was putting a lot of pressure on my pelvis and all the various things that are down there that have to do with child growing, that have to do with childbirth and pregnancy, that I was actually in quite a bit of pain for most of the last chunk. I would probably even say the second half. My pelvis, like the bones were, my bones like really hurt, and like turning over at night was like really painful, and thankfully not everywhere, just in my pelvis, but that's a pretty central part of the body. Like walking and sitting and standing and laying, like turning, and it's like even like standing in the shower was hard sometimes, or like I was taking a lot of baths just because it felt nice to not have any weight on my pelvis. So that created the way she was carrying created some issues for just all the different things that are involved down there. So thankfully I don't have any of those issues anymore because she's out. So thank goodness. It's like feels really good to not be like in pain all the time. But something that I was really scared about was my recovery because it was so hard with Joe. I was really scared about tearing and stitches because with her, I had stitches and they took a long time to heal. And so I was just in a lot of pain, like all the time, after she was born. And so I was really nervous that that was going to happen again and I would be like totally debilitated because I like couldn't even get on and off the couch without help. For a long time, and like getting in and out of bed was really hard, so Paul had to lower our bed frame. He built it, so thankfully that was kind of easy, but he had to do that like when we got home from the hospital, and like, yeah, so thankfully this time that didn't really happen. I got a couple stitches, I think, but I did not feel as nearly as miserable. I had Ellie. Okay, I'll back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. Something I forgot to include in my story with Joe was that the epidural the first time around made me so thirsty. I was like chugging water, like so much water. And so right after I had her, I had to go to the bathroom and I threw up so intensely, and my body had just pushed out a human and a placenta and was swollen and bleeding and all this stuff, and I was throwing up, which like throwing up can be really painful anyway. Everybody's thrown up. All the muscles are involved, we're even crying. It's like, and so it was like all those things put together. And so this time around when I got the epidural, I was like, I am not gonna drink water, because that was probably the most miserable part of the whole delivery. Because I got the epidural the first time around, labor and delivery was like kind of fun. I forgot to mention that. It was like, overall, it was like a very pleasant experience. But it's because I wasn't in like massive amounts of pain the whole time. So this time around with Ellie, I got induced 2 days before her due date. So her due date was August 11th, 2019, and I got induced on the 9th. There were no major like health risks and problems, but both her and I would benefit from a timely arrival. There were just some things that made it a really attractive option in terms of scheduling, like with Joe and childcare, and like just like what our schedule looks like in regards to school year and things like that, that made scheduling induction that made getting induced an attractive option. Again, totally not for everybody, just what we decided to do. And so I went in on 6 o'clock on the 9th at 6 in the morning. I think I was late, so I think it was like 6:15, by myself. So Paul stayed behind with Joe, because I was just gonna sit there, you know, waiting for stuff to happen. And so he came later with Joe. There's a fly and it's gonna drive me crazy. There might be more details in this version of the story because I remember more than when Joe was born. So I got to the hospital, got all hooked up to all the things. And then later Paul and Joe came and we just all hung out for a little bit. And then we were able to pass Joe off to some grandparents for safekeeping. And we just waited for things to happen. So I came in already dilated a centimeter, 2.5 centimeters, I think. Got to 5 relatively quickly, and then plateaued for a while, for a few hours, and then all of a sudden I was 10 centimeters and it was like go time. And in that time I got the epidural. I pushed for 2 minutes. On one contraction, she came out. And I say that kind of hesitantly because some women push for like hours and hours, and it's just kind of unfair that she just like slipped right out. And because my body had gone through this whole process before, there wasn't as much damage to my body. It wasn't as traumatic for me, and I didn't have to get as intensive stitching and stuff like that. So Ellie was 6 pounds, 10 ounces and 19 inches. Joe was a little bit bigger. So that also could have something to do with the damage that was done to my body. Joe was 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 19 and a half inches. So she was bigger than Ellie. I don't think there's a reason, because Ellie was full term and they were both full term. So I don't really know why that was. But I looked and felt bigger with Ellie than I did with Joe, because she was carrying lower and looser. And my muscles were not as strong as when I was pregnant with Joe. So all those things contribute. So she came out pretty quick, and didn't have any fluid in her lungs. And so we were only at the hospital for 2 days. It was like a very pleasant experience. Again, my labor and delivery was like kind of fun. Definitely not like a really long, grueling experience in terms of the delivery itself. Again, my recovery with Joe was really, really tough. But this time around, I like don't feel like I just had a baby. Even when I pushed her out, I was like, oh my gosh, there she is. I just had a baby. And I did not feel like it at all. My husband was like, you don't look like you just had a baby. And I was like, all the nurses were like, what is going on here? So I don't know if it was just the epidural or the fact that I didn't have to push for long periods of time, or my body was just kind of ready. And so it just happened like pretty smoothly. It's fun because we had some of the same nurses as we did 2 years before. So they were like, we remember you had a really quick, like, it was a unique enough experience with Joe that they remembered us. And yeah, just kind of a funny thing. You know, we got to have our doctor again deliver her. She was on call that whole weekend, so that's why we scheduled it for that time. So she could check in throughout the weekend. And the moment Joe first saw her, she was like, baby. She was excited to see her, and so far the adjustment's been pretty good. Today, Joe was in a really great mood pretty much all day. Paul's still on paternity leave, so it's fun to be able to all be home together. And my recovery has gone really well. I've done some like sitz baths, but I don't even feel like I needed to. I definitely should have done them the first time around. And she's been eating well and sleeping well, and my milk has come in more and faster. And so overall, I feel like my body's just like, oh yeah, we've done this before. We kind of know what we're doing. But also, I think there are a lot of different factors that made this time easier. I've done it before. The learning curve is not nearly as steep. She was smaller than Joe was, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. And I wasn't pushing for like hours and hours, so my body didn't undergo this trauma that maybe some women undergo in terms of length of time. I think those are the major points. There are a lot of little details about both experiences that I could share. I think I shared the most important things though, and kind of the things you guys wanted to know. I don't know, like it was just both experiences were really great. I wouldn't trade them or change them. But now I have 2 kids, and it's like, oh my gosh, who am I? Like, I still feel like I'm a 20-year-old dinking around in college. Like, it's just such a crazy experience, but I'm so grateful that I get to do it with Paul, and that he is just the man that he is, and he's such a great dad to these girls. And so far, both are rock stars, and I mean, I'm always gonna think they're rock stars. They're my kids, which is crazy even to say that I have kids, plural. I have children. But Joe was so great that like so many people felt the need to say like, oh, you've been spoiled, like watch out, the next one's gonna be a nightmare, or like by comparison, all kids are gonna be rotten compared to her, and like all this stuff that's like, yeah, we know she's great, but also that's not helpful. So it's been just sweet to like so far be so encouraged by her health and well-being, and just Joe's interactions with her have been sweet. It's been cool to have a couple weeks all together as a little family. We'll see how it goes when I have them both by myself. Like I said, the learning curve is not nearly as steep, and so I was not doing this well when I had Joe. And so just to encourage anyone who's like, oh my gosh, this is the expectation, like everybody's different. Things are going well this time around that did not go well last time. I don't know if I have much else to say. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, thanks for wanting to hear my stories. Yeah, I hope they were encouraging to you. I hope that it was resourceful. If there are other things related to pregnancy and childbirth that I didn't cover that you guys would want to see, please let me know either on Instagram or in here. And I hope that you have a splendid evening. Well, you might not be watching this in the evening. I'm gonna have a splendid evening. So there's that. Keep it real. And thanks for joining me.